You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, but you can't find the fighter. But I see it in you, so we're gonna walk it out and move mountains. We're gonna walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. When the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying, but I promise you, take the world to its feet and move mountains. Take it to its feet and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. When the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying, but I promise you, take the world to its feet and move mountains. Take it to its feet and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, all we need is hope, but that we have each other, but that we have each other. We will rise, we will rise, we will rise. Whoa, we'll rise. Spread a little hope and love now. Encourage them to rise up now. Spread a little hope and love now. Encourage them to rise up now.
the word radical is literally becoming like the word literally. Radical truth and change and such. And I think it's because we are a generation past a present iconic exemplar of radical love, radically rooted in struggle and bearing the scars to mark forward progression. A love that you can see from across the planet because it's planted in a desire for all people to be free. Rooted, it weeps verse. It believes so fiercely it bends the moral arc of the universe. Literally. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a generational radical. I mean, if you think freedom or justice is radical. A courageous man whose example is the placement of faith in fairness in his prayerful hands. The matter of Black life is rooted in a fair administration of justice. It's actually not about the tragic loss of life, which in and of itself is horrific and unjustified. It is the searing lack of reprisal thereafter. It is actually a movement that is more about the law than it is about life. Its sorrow is in the disposal, been matched by very few. I'm going to be 44 this year. I was born in 1975, but I'm not really feeling the number 45, so I'm just going to be 44 again this year. I looked up to Desmond Tutu when I was impressionable and young. My son voted for the first time this year. His ballot cast is a democratic act in the lineage of a full menu of rights and in the full shadow of American truths without reconciliation. As I age, I am ever grateful for the living example of radical love and the audacious reservoir of compassion that would permit forgiveness. Now, I'm not there yet. But I'm not permitted to ignore the mission my elders have given. Black liberatory lineage, soulful as hell, praying hands, a loving man, justice for all.
On behalf of everyone at Article3.org, welcome to International Human Rights Day. I'm Dana King, and while I wish that we could all be together here at SF Jazz for our traditional December 10th event, we are so grateful that the global human rights community still managed to gather for this special day. To each of you, wherever you may be at home in the world, we send a warm San Francisco welcome. This is such an important moment to celebrate the lifetime achievements of this year's Article 3 Human Rights Global Treasure Award recipient, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. For so much of 2020, human progress seemed to roll backwards in a tide of unrelenting loss, grief, and uncertainty. And yet, we also see signs of resilience and hope in the powerful movement for racial justice, in the will of the voters who turned out for elections during a pandemic, and in the achievements of scientists racing towards a vaccine for COVID-19. That brings us to our theme for today. We are standing at a precipice. We can either look down and be paralyzed by what is broken, or we can look ahead, organize, and mobilize to fix all that we can. The man we honor today has stood at the precipice more than once during his long and accomplished life, whether helping to bring an end to apartheid, overseeing the truth and reconciliation process to help his fellow South Africans find peace with their painful past, or now nearing his 90th birthday as an activist for climate justice and youth empowerment. In African spiritual tradition, the young travel through life in tracks of the elders, guided by the wisdom, teachings, and values of the generations before them. Over his long life, Archbishop Tutu has always looked ahead rather than down into that precipice, and in so doing, he cleared broad tracks for the human rights activists of today. The Archbishop is unable to join us today, yet his voice and his ideals shine throughout the program you are about to enjoy. The Archbishop calls himself a prisoner of hope, and we are too, of the shared belief that we are obligated to build a better world. Let's remember that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was ratified only a short time after another global catastrophe. Looking at the devastation in Europe or Japan in the spring of 1945, at the end of World War II, who could have imagined that only 3 short years later, on this date in 1948, nations that had recently been enemies would gather in Paris to enshrine the human rights of all people? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights followed a war that claimed an estimated 60 million lives worldwide, inflicted atrocities on a scale unseen by history, and destroyed the global economy. And yet, with that suffering still raw, the members of the United Nations General Assembly came together and permanently changed the moral terrain of a broken world. History shows us that out of the deepest destruction and pain come the greatest opportunities. We find ourselves at a similar inflection point in 2020. We will reimagine ways to fold the painful lessons of 2020 into a plan for constructive action. We now have the privilege of hearing from one of America's foremost historians and scholars. He is a National Book Award winner and the #1 New York Times bestselling author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi.
I couldn't be more excited to share the stage today in honoring Archbishop Tutu, who of course is one of my heroes, like he is, I suspect, every human rights voice around the world. I can also say that earlier this year, I had planned before the global pandemic to visit South Africa. And indeed, it was going to be my first trip to South Africa. But of course, like many people all over the world, my plans had to shift. Archbishop Tutu is one of the most critical and important humans that ever lived, because he simply has inspired me and has inspired so many to be ruled by the very best of humanity. For human beings, no matter the color of their skin, no matter their ethnic differences, that we can all look at each other and see humans and see the beauty of the human rainbow. Even, I can recall when Archbishop Tutu referred to South Africa as the Rainbow Nation. And indeed, we live in a rainbow world. And at some point, my generation is hopefully going to continue Archbishop Tutu's generation to really bring that rainbow together, to really sort of show humanity its beauty. I'm excited to pay tribute to Archbishop Tutu. Indeed, every nation on earth, and certainly the United States, needs a truth and reconciliation process like South Africa. What he led and what South Africa was able to do really stands as a blueprint for all of humankind, for really every nation. And indeed, those folks like me are really striving to initiate something similar in the United States, because indeed we're still a nation that is not building its politics based on truth. There still has not been racial reconciliation. But indeed, if South Africa can overcome and move past apartheid, then apartheid can be overcome anywhere in the world. And so I'm forever inspired by Archbishop Tutu, by the people of South Africa. Really, humanity is forever inspired. And so to me, I know of no better person who can receive this Article 3 Human Rights Global Treasure Award, because to me, the people that humanity should treasure the most are the very people who bring together humanity. Thank you.
Arch, one of the greatest gifts of my life was spending time with you to set up the elders. Being in your presence is always a wonderful combination of contagious laughter, never-ending hope, and fierce love. Just the medicine the world needs right now. Each day, your words about the path of peace, starting with talking to your enemies, reminds me of the importance of forgiveness and reaching across divides. Your legacy of never remaining neutral in the face of injustice will constantly light a fire in my belly, and so many others. We all stand on your shoulders, and you know, if I was with you at this moment, I would be getting on my knees to kiss your feet. Anyway, lots of love and congratulations to you, Arch. Cheers.
Now, firstly, greeting Bishop Tutu, my long time was a trusted, respected friend. And of course, the senior spiritual leader. These are positive words. In a way, this old person is quite funny. So because of that, we become a very, very close friend. So now today, on the occasion of his being conferred the Human Rights Global Treasure Award, I really admire. You see, in 90 years, you spent a life with principle and helping humanity. And since we both now become old, so now physical meeting, I go there difficult, and you also come here difficult. But in spiritual level, we never separate. We're always together.
Archbishop Tutu, congratulations on receiving this special Human Rights Award today. As a young person in South Africa, I want to thank you for fearlessly and consistently championing human rights for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or political view. Your legacy will live on through each and every one of us. As a student of law and person of faith in South Africa, you have taught me how to balance secular law with what God desires of us, how to balance being a peacekeeper and a peacemaker, how to balance acceptance and forgiveness with taking a strong stand for justice. You openly condemned all forms of oppression, while at the same time urging reconciliation between oppressor and oppressed. You have taught us how to respond to violence with peace. Your voice is a global one, standing for the rights of people everywhere, whether it be in South Africa, Tibet, Zimbabwe, or Palestine. Be assured that we will take the baton you have given us and run with it. May God continue to bless you.
My name is Victor Chen. I am the Director for African Youth Initiative Network in Uganda, and I'm also the Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Young African Leaders Fellow. I join the rest of the world in celebrating your beautiful life, Papa Archbishop Desmond Tutu. You are an icon for peace and justice. As someone who was born in war zone and growing up in the internally displaced people's camp in northern Uganda, I relate to your choice and commitment to promoting peace and justice. It was on this International Human Rights Day in 2003 when my own brother and my cousin were abducted by the rebels of the Lord Resistance Army, and unfortunately they have never been seen again. Neither do we know about their fates, but they remain among us, over 30,000 Ugandan children who were abducted and they have never been accounted for. Papa, among the wonderful leaders on this planet, you are my greatest inspiration. As you may hear, birds are singing in the background. We are all paying a tribute to you for your dedication to serve as a bridge between human and God. Receive my love from Uganda, Papa, and thank you for being a blessing from Africa to mankind and to the rest of the world.
In the darkest of times, brave men and women stood up. When oppressed, they rose. Together, they fought for greater justice, respect, and compassion. They had a dream for a better future.
I want to welcome you all to the Human Rights Day event. Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is perhaps the most critical for protecting populations globally.
What we are looking at is how deeply important it is to support movements around the world, whether it is labor rights or women's rights or the rights of migrants.
We are in the edge of a huge catastrophe in Amazonia. We had more than 60% of this forest. Today, we have less than 7%.
The challenges we're facing today is everything is contestable. Everything can be called fake news. And so the methodology that already began is super relevant today because we fight back against the anti-fact movement by being uncontestable.
This is a very important time, and Article 3 Org is a very important organization that is drawing our attention to the need for us all to support human rights, individual rights.
Today is a time to celebrate all that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has brought about. Let us shrink the change and figure out how to advance the dignity and security of people everywhere who are counting on us.
I appeal to you to take a wing and to journey with us, to build up that better human being in ourselves, and from ourselves we improve the experiences for others.
We have heard some difficult stories and been moved by determined activists. We've heard reasons for hope. Your being here, committing to doing something now and in the future contributes to that hope.
And now we have an historic first. You are about to hear from 4 of the former UN High Commissioners for Human Rights, the first time they have appeared all together. Collectively, the High Commissioners will share a trove of insight and experience for taking on today's challenges as they explore the lessons from each of their tenures as the highest-ranking human rights official of the United Nations. This is a remarkable gathering.
Thank you, Dana, for that introduction, and welcome to so many of you from around the world for this first-of-its-kind conversation, historic, really, among the 4 previous UN High Commissioners for Human Rights. And I'm grateful to the 4 of you coming to us today from literally around the world to be together in conversation with us. And I'd say if ever there was a moment when we needed your wisdom, I think we'd all agree now is just one of those moments. So thank you so much for joining us. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Jose Ayala Lasso, appointed as the first High Commissioner for Human Rights in 1994. Unfortunately, Dr. Lasso was not able to join us today. But to point out, in those early years, it was his challenge to respond to the mandate granted by the General Assembly and to establish the credibility of the Office of the High Commissioner. And I think we'd all agree on the call today that in so many ways, He laid the foundation for the work of the UN High Commissioners to follow. We're grateful for his leadership and we wish him well today. Let me jump right in. And looking back in a decade or two, we may well point to these early years in the 21st century as a turning point for human rights. We're seeing a rise of authoritarian leadership, a decline of a rules-based international order, the withdrawal of the Trump administration from the Human Rights Council in 2018, and the election of states to the council that seem far more interested in national sovereignty than they are in individual human rights. In contrast, there's been an extraordinary global movement emerge for racial justice, in addition to the rise of youth around the world demanding climate justice, and even this awful recognition of how disproportionately the pandemic has impacted communities of color and minority communities. I'd argue that this soul searching across racial justice, the climate crisis, and the pandemic could well spark a new movement in the 21st century for human rights. Zayden, I want to turn to you first, and I want to ask you, where do you imagine we're headed over the next decade when it comes to the advance of universal human rights? What are some of the challenges and what are some of the opportunities you see?
Well, Randy, thank you so much. I mean, it's such an honor to be joining four individuals whom I've long admired. There was always an occasion when I was an ambassador and Mary Robinson would come to brief the UN, or Louise Arbour, or Navi Pillay. It was always going to be different, and to have followed them and then be joining them today. I should have said three. I sort of added Jose. Jose, my memory is gone. Listen, I think
let's not forget Sergio Vieira de Mello.
And yes,
that's
departed.
Absolutely right.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, obviously, key here is that we need to see over the next, a few months, an orderly transition of power in the United States, and for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to assume the mantle of leadership without too much disruption. Otherwise, many of us living in the US are going to end up with Louise in Canada, and I hope she will welcome us in her home. But if that is the case, then perhaps and also we'd like to see the Biden administration invest a great deal of attention to the situation domestically. And if they can do this in terms of racial inequality, racial injustice, policing, and so forth, and it gives them a firm ground with which then to further push the universal human rights agenda in parts of the world that have come under enormous pressure from China, from Russia, through business influences, and let alone then the authoritarian and populist leaders. And we hope that this will mark a turning point, and both for racial injustice, or let's say racial justice, to see it advance in the United States, but also human rights more broadly across the world.
Well, Zaid, you point to the rise of authoritarianism, and Louise, I want to turn to you. And I think of anybody, you've seen authoritarianism up close and personal as a former chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal in your historic indictment of Milosevic. And drawing from your experience as both a high commissioner and a chief prosecutor, how do you make sense of the draw of authoritarianism?
Thank you, Randy. Zaid, I hate to tell you, but Canada has closed the borders with the US, and not to our great pride, we're not even processing asylum claims. So don't hold your breath. Try to get your country under control, because Canada is not an option for now. The way you raise the question of the push against authoritarianism is indicative of, I think, a fault line in the international human rights system that we must recognize, which is that we have had, and I could speak, I think, for the dominant voices in the human rights system, both in the official side inside the UN and in civil society, a very Western-centric view of human rights. I think until we recognize that, we're going to have a lot of trouble changing course and addressing the challenges that I think were well explained, the challenges and opportunities presented by the pandemic, by the rise against inequalities of all kinds, racism in particular. And I think the focus on the rise of authoritarianism continues to show a Western preference for civil and political rights over social and economic and cultural rights. And it has not been lost on many that we vilify that the advancement of our values has happily coincided with the advancement of our interests. So it seems to me that there are great opportunities, and the challenges and opportunities ahead actually call for a recognition, an equal recognition of social and economic rights, the pandemic, right to health, inequalities. But to me, the fundamental point is to recognize, if we come back to the roots of the human rights, modern conception of human rights, the Roosevelt Four Freedoms, I think there is no question that between freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of religion, and freedom of expression, the West has systematically preferred freedom from fear over freedom from want, and freedom of expression over freedom of religion. And the West, as it turned out, had the means to advance its values and its interests. I think I think this is critical.
Well, you point out this position on the West, and certainly among states that perhaps aren't measuring up to the claims that are placed upon them, and we're hearing more and more, perhaps even led by the U.S., about a certain kind of fatigue, if you will, or human rights fatigue. And I think you may have recently seen this New Yorker cartoon that says, my desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane. And this fatigue seems to press on states as an attempt on their part not to follow through on the claims. And Navi, I want to turn to you and ask you, you faced down fatigue, as Louise pointed out, during the apartheid era, then as the first woman of color appointed to the High Court of South Africa. How do we guard against this fatigue? And is there a shadow side of this fatigue that we should be paying attention to?
No, you ask any activist. I mean, ask Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whom we are honoring with this conversation. Yeah, an activist and a human rights defender never gives up, actually. They don't complain of fatigue because there are always problems there. And I want to begin also by saying how happy I am to see my colleagues, whom I truly honor, because they set the building blocks, Mary and Louise, and I continued thereafter. And I want to say how much I support Louise's point, because I'm speaking from South Africa, Durban. I'm speaking from Africa. And here we see things differently. The young people have no time to hear about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, its promise of equality and dignity, because that's not the reality. So I would say the challenge for us is not to get fatigued, but stand up and continue the fight for people like us in poor countries, in developing countries who are being left behind. And the most recent is this discovery of a COVID vaccination, and rich countries are scrambling to buy them. What's going to happen to the poor countries? You know, Africa was not able to purchase any medication for the other virus, the H1N1 and Ebola, because it was purchased by the rich countries. So what people are saying, get off the concepts and the theories, we've got them all. We want to see more translation into reality. That's what all the street protests are telling us. And this is what we have to bear in mind. So I heard you speak about the current crises, and you mentioned racism, of course, which touches every South African, and also the virus. But remember, there's economic turmoil all over. And our unemployment figures in South Africa have increased by 7.5% since COVID. Can you imagine 11.1 million people in South Africa of working age do not have jobs? So this is what we push. All rights for all people, and they're very, very important. I get energized by young people, if you ask me, about how we deal with fatigue. You just have to listen to children. They got it. They understand human rights. 8-year-olds told me, well, that's common sense that every human being has human rights. That's common sense. Why are you telling us this? So I'm very hopeful. And particularly in my time, we had social media. And so millions were able to hear the High Commissioner's words. So that was very useful. The danger that we must now address is the threat of false information, confusion, and the lack of trust by people in the media and in the news. We do have to address that.
Mary, Navi raises some issues that are really parallel to an argument that I've been reading about more recently around trade-offs that may have to be made between human rights and robust climate policy. And this is something we're facing now in the 21st century. And yours has been such a powerful voice for climate justice along with human rights, and most certainly in your role as the chair of the elders. As we navigate the 21st century, do you think there's a trade-off required between human rights and climate policy?
Thank you, Randy. And first of all, I'd like to say how much I'm also very happy to see my three colleagues. We have a mutual admiration society going. But also, this is a very interesting time. I very much agree with the point Louise and Navi have been making, that human rights has been too Western-centric. That's why after I finished my own 5 years, I established Realizing Rights to work on economic and social rights in African countries and do it differently. Show how if you're working on right to health, you've got to support the health ministry and help the health ministry to link with the finance ministry. And, so we tried to do new things of how NGOs could be supportive as well as holding to account, but mainly supportive on the economic and social rights. But I think we are at a very difficult time, but challenging time, and maybe urgent enough to give us an opportunity, not to waste this crisis. Because what COVID has taught us is that it has exacerbated all of the inequalities and linked them with that concept from the feminist movement of intersectionality. And that is going to be very important for the human rights movement. Actually, the human rights movement needs to get out of its comfort zone, if it is a comfort zone, or out of its place, and link massively now, out of its silo, and link with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Fridays for Future movement, and the violence against women movement, the children movement, all of these movements, the slavery movement, everything.
I want to continue forward and just thinking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights over the next 72 years. And I've often wondered if a new language is required that adjusts to the realities of this century versus the post-war era of 1948. And it almost seems like actually it may be a recovery of the language that was so powerful in 1948 and be regained in the 21st century. I'd be curious, all of your comments on that. Do we need a new language, or do we simply need to recover the meaning and purpose of that language in 1948?
You'll start a war as to which language you're going to choose. I think we have a good declaration. We've got to turn that into reality. The criticism I have often heard is the too much focus on individual rights. And so communities and people are not protected. But I think that we can interpret the existing declaration to cover them.
I agree with Navi, and I think we need to spend far more time talking up Article 29, that everyone has duties to the community and a responsibility for the rights of others. It's a great article, and for some reason it doesn't get enough attention. I think that the Declaration and the world of human rights has evolved quite well. And actually, I now think, and I didn't answer this perhaps enough when you asked me originally about climate justice, Randy, I think climate justice is very useful at the moment. Briefly, and I think a few of you have heard me say this before, but I like to talk about the 5 layers of injustice that climate justice speaks to. The first layer is the injustice that it disproportionately and earlier affects the poorest countries, the poorest communities, the small island states, the indigenous peoples. These are the black and brown people of our world. It's racist. Secondly, the gender dimensions of the lack of power, the lack of the different social roles of women. The third, the intergenerational injustice. The fourth, the injustice of the pathways to development of developed and developing countries. The industrialized countries had a pathway of fossil fuel, and now we have to wean ourselves off with just transition. But the developing countries promised before Paris to go as green as possible, but they said, we need the investment, we need this training, we need the skills, and they haven't got any of that in solidarity as they should. And they have found oil and gas and coal. What are they to do? Actually, if they go the dirty route, they will be affected first. That's the unfairness. But we will all be affected because it will use up the carbon budget. We have to be sensible about understanding that and having solidarity. And the fifth injustice is the injustice to nature. And I think one of the things that human rights has to evolve more is to link more with planet and people, to link more with those, as I said, to get out of our silos and find common ground on human rights, gender and human rights, with all of the other constituencies that want the kind of change they want.
Can I jump in on this as well? I think the beauty of the Universal Declaration is the plain language used in it. When we moved to the treaties that succeeded it in the two covenants, we end up with language that's much more legalistic and sort of raises human rights into some abstraction, legal abstraction. Indeed, when you look at some of the general comments that come out of the treaty bodies, very legalistic. And for the average person, it sort of creates a remove. It's almost that human rights becomes an elitist, a project of elites, of lawyers who are highly educated, and people who are sort of detached from the grassroots sentiments being expressed at the district level. And I think that needs to be recovered somehow. And emphasis, when people say, and you use as your title, human rights on a precipice, and when people use the term human rights, others switch off. If we were to say people on a precipice, as Mary is suggesting, it has much more sort of power and much more of a draw to for people to identify with it in a way that they would otherwise not. So I think we do need to make it more accessible.
Well, one last question. We've all heard the Archbishop Tutu's famous quote where he said, he was asked if he's optimistic by the reporter, and he said, "I'm not optimistic, no, I'm quite different, I'm hopeful." He draws from the prophet Zechariah and says, "I'm a prisoner of hope." And Mary, I've heard you talk about this before around this notion of being hopeful. How for you and for all of you is hope manifested in your life today?
I think that expression, prisoner of hope, is extraordinarily important because it means that even though the situation is extremely difficult, which it is at the moment for people are losing their livelihoods, they're losing their health, they're losing their jobs. There's a real sense of anxiety because of COVID, because of what's happening. But if you're a prisoner of hope, then you see the glass may not be half full, but there's something there that you can work with in your community, work with others, help your neighbors, help those even less well off, do something. It's an activist approach.
I think you're putting a lot of very energized content in a word that, on the other hand, can be seen as very passive, as if hope is for something to happen that is not necessarily within your control. It's just, you remember, you cannot help but think of other presidential campaigns in the US when the Obama campaign was all launched on the audacity of hope. And when later down the course, some people were saying maybe a little less hope and a little more audacity would be actually have more impact. So I think it's important. Rhetoric matters.
I think that's fantastic. I think the Arch would also say he's a prisoner of hope and he's audacious. And so he brings both of those. So listen, for the hundreds of people watching this conversation today, let me thank you for your courage and the resolve that you inspire in all of us. And it was also Archbishop Tutu that years ago said, do your little bit of good where you are. It's all those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. And I think for everybody watching today, you most certainly have changed the world, and the world is a much better place because of the four of you. Thank you so much, everybody.
The very first time I met with the Arch was when him and Auntie Leah decided to come and visit me in Stockholm in my home. And when the car pulled up, Father walked straight up to my children, not to me. And he looked at August, who was the eldest, and he closed his fist like this and went up and said, "Hey, man." And that's how the Archbishop Desmond Tutu connected with my children the first time. Ever since they opened up this communication path, Father has taught my children about them belonging to the rest of the world, not only belonging to Sweden where they were born, but besides them being blonde and blue-eyed kids, they belong to South Africa as well. They belong to Africa. They belong to the ecosystem of humans, that this interdependence, this Ubuntu, as we say in South Africa, means that they are because he is, and that we are because everyone else is. This is how mankind is stitched together. Thank you, Arch.
The Arch's belief in the power of truth and reconciliation has been one that has guided me throughout my journey as an activist. I look at my own life story as a survivor of both female genital mutilation and child marriage, and how this belief has helped build my relationship with my family. I had to have a conversation with my father where I stood in my truth to help him understand the impact of these practices on my life. And through that, not only was I able to forgive, but I was able to heal. And this also applies in my work with communities. We create a platform where women can share their truth and heal so that they can move on with their life. I want to say thank you to Arch for not only leading the way, but inspiring a generation of young activists around the world. Thank you.
Dear Archbishop Desmond Tutu, congratulations for being a global treasure, not only for human rights, but for justice in all its forms. Thank you for all that you have done in your life to inspire millions and millions of us to actually want to stand up, take action, and to ensure we're making a decision to be part of the solution rather than through inaction being part of the problem. Today, our world is in a very precarious situation. The 10 years that we are entering now is the most critical decade for humanity, and we will need to draw on you, Arch, and your inspiration, that all the things that you taught us, to fight for justice with compassion and love, to keep a sense of humor, to be willing to question things that have been accepted as norm, and not to engage in denying the reality that we are running out of climate and that we cannot have an economic system that is as unjust and broken as this one that we have. We also need to draw on your commitment of saying we must build alliances and make sure that we do what the feminist movement taught us decades ago, which is to engage in intersectionality. All of these lessons are critically important right now. And what would you say to philanthropy at this moment? Perhaps you would say to them, in your typical humor and typical compassion, folks, maybe you are engaging too much in philanthropy rather than philanthropy, because you have to engage in a way now that is not simply treating the symptoms of the problem. You have to make investments which are supporting structural and systemic change. Arch, thank you for everything that you have done. Thank you for being the inspiration that you are, and we wish you well for many years with us as you continue to inspire us as one of the most important global treasures that humanity has.
Today, we celebrate an extraordinary man who has dedicated his life to building peace and advocating for equality and restorative justice around the world. Archbishop often speaks of the deeply held principle of Ubuntu, a Southern African value that calls upon us to recognize our interconnectedness and interdependence. Father's concept of Ubuntu is simple. It's my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. Today, when humanity is challenged with thriving together on this shared planet, recognizing the power of Ubuntu is more important than ever. Thank you, dear Father, for reminding us of this eternal truth of loving and lifting each other up.
Archbishop Tutu taught us something extremely important that is often forgotten. And that is when we are gathered around the collective table in an attempt to talk about justice and equality, the first thing we have to do is listen to one another. Whether around the table you have gathered friend or foe, we have to first start by creating an understanding for what the other person thinks, how they feel, and what their experiences are. That's what we have to build upon. Once we can do that, once we can open our hearts and our minds to truly listening and hearing what each other has to say, then we have the foundation for creating and reaching true justice and equality and putting an end to the systemic racism that has held us all back for far too long. Open our hearts, listen, and hear. That's the lesson of Archbishop Tutu.
We hope you'll enjoy this performance of Rhiannon Giddens, recorded before the pandemic on this very stage at SF Jazz.
I've got a babe, but shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be weeping. But how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. I've got a body dark and strong. I was young, but not for long. You took me to bed, a little girl. Left me in a woman's world. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Day by day, I work the line. Every minute overtime. Fingers nimble, fingers quick. My fingers bleed to make you rich. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Take my body,
Hi, I'm so delighted to be contributing to this wonderful moment in celebration of human rights, in particular, celebration of the great work and legacy of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I have been in awe of his work and his life for many, many years. And I think what he has taught us is critically important at this moment in world history. This is a time of great division and conflict. People are polarized. People are looking for different kinds of truths that are not really truths. And there's so much distrust and animosity. And that was precisely the situation in South Africa when Desmond Tutu began pushing people to think more broadly, breaking down barriers, urging people to recognize that there are some universal truths, some basic truths that we all have to embrace. And it was that commitment to truth-telling that allowed things to progress in South Africa in ways that many people never thought possible. I love Archbishop Tutu because he's someone who believes things he hasn't seen. He's always recognized that to make justice, to advance justice, to protect the rights of the vulnerable, you have to be willing to stand up even when people say sit down. You have to be willing to speak even when people say be quiet. He went places and spoke to people who others thought you should never speak to. He did things to urge the power of truth-telling. And I just think that witness, that legacy, is urgently needed all around the world. Here in the United States, where I work and live, our country is struggling to recover from the legacy of racial inequality, the pain of the indigenous genocide that took place when Europeans came to this continent, the tragedy that follows 2.5 centuries of slavery, and the multiple ways in which that has created this racial hierarchy and this ideology of white supremacy that we still see manifest in our country today. And I don't think we've made the progress that we need to make in this country because we haven't committed to the kind of truth-telling that Archbishop Tutu has taught us is essential for nations, for communities to recover from human rights violations. No place in the world will heal, will be repaired, can overcome the kind of violence, the kind of destruction, the kind of horrific abuse that we've had to see throughout world history without a commitment to truth-telling. South Africa is a model. It's going to be needed in Rwanda to fully recover from the genocide. It's needed in Germany, where that country has been trying to respond to a horrific era of Holocaust and abuse. We need it in America. We need it all over the world where people have been victimized by bigotry and violence, by genocide, by hatred and animosity. And what's exciting is that people like Archbishop Tutu have taught us that we can heal, that we can get to something better. I believe that for my country, the United States, I think there's something better waiting for us. I think there's something that feels more like freedom, more like equality, more like justice than what we've witnessed to date. But to get there, I am persuaded that we have to commit to truth-telling, that we have to commit to the kind of activism that Archbishop Tutu has represented his whole life. I think that truth and reconciliation, truth and restoration, truth and reparation, truth and justice, I think these things are sequential. And there is no one who has embodied the meaning and the purpose and the power of truth-telling more than our beloved Archbishop Tutu. I had the great privilege of spending time with Arch, and he prayed for me, and he laid hands on me, and he encouraged me to believe bigger things, greater things for what we can achieve. And because of that, I continue to do the work that I do. And I just want to thank him and all of you who are celebrating him for his life's work, and for the great power, meaning, purpose, and inspiration that he provides to all of us. Have a happy Human Rights Day. And congratulations to all of you for this convening, and all the best to you as we continue this important work.
Archbishop Tutu embodies anthropologist Margaret Mead's theory that human beings are not so much products of their environment, but of their choices. The Arch has had the courage throughout his life to act on his choices. He is a tailor who heals the tears and the tears in the fabric of humanity. Today, Human Rights Day, and going forward, it is more urgent than ever before in modern history that the Arch's deep toolbox of love, compassion, equality and reconciliation be shared and put to work to inspire and equip younger generations.
Hi, Arch. Congratulations on your Global Treasure Award. You are such a beacon and example for all of us to reach across divides and to embrace each other. And I also just love your fierceness to never accept the unacceptable, and a constant reminder to all of us that silence is never, ever an option.
On this International Human Rights Day, I pay tribute to you, Dada, who for me is the epitome of leadership, resilience, and courage, who was never afraid to use their voice to protect the weakest amongst us. You always rose up against injustice and showed young people like myself how to do it. Dada, we thank you for leading us with determination, perseverance, and humility. Your heartwarming presence has served as a beacon of hope in a hurting world in need of love. As part of the youth of South Africa, I'm proud of the struggles that you have fought for this and many other nations. You taught us that we are human together and that we have rights simply because we are human. Today, I'm especially inspired by the content of your character. You have sacrificed so much to ensure that not only my human rights are secured, but those of my children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. And we, the young people who have benefited so much from this, pledge to uphold your legacy. I salute you. You are a living legacy and a hero of the liberation struggle. And this award will not only go towards recognizing your lifelong commitments towards speaking truth to power, but will continue to shine as a light to so many nations in and around our country. We love you and we thank you for serving as a beacon of hope and an inspiration to many.
Archbishop Tutu, in the arc of his lifelong and selfless commitment to the struggle for freedom and social justice in South Africa, was a great inspiration to us. In fact, his DNA is very much ingrained and knitted into the fabric of the constitutional democracy that we have built. And I think today, faced with multiple crises, from an ecological emergency to the rise of fascism and right-wing populism, to inequality and poverty, and an increasingly more violent world, particularly against Mother Nature and against children and women and innocent people, what he brought and what he represents is building bridges. And I think that's something that should inspire us all to be the better human beings that are prepared to work together to leave a better world for the future generations.
Hello, my dear Father Tutu. I have been calling you to mind daily for months now. In your walk, you've left perfectly laid heartprints and footprints. By you, we have learned to watch for the best in each other, especially when it's hard to see. We've learned to encourage the best and really to pull for the best in each other. And when we fail in our actions towards one another, by you, we have been shown how to correct each other with compassion. We've learned to insist on justice for those injured, for those brutalized, but not to leave the perpetrator out of the equation. To complete her work, justice must be transformative for all involved. Certainly recompense for the violated, but the rehabilitating of the moral transgressor and the overturning of wretched systems is a necessary step forward. My father and my friend, I especially have learned from you that in waging the struggle to embrace joy, to exercise joy, to really entertain joy. I wouldn't know where to plant my feet in this walk without you. I'm so grateful for you, and I love you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce the co-founder of Article3.org, Darian Swig. Darian and co-founder David Keller conceived of the Article 3 Global Human Rights Treasure Award as a way of bringing the human rights community together each year to honor one leader whose work exemplifies the spirit and the intent of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on the anniversary of its signing.
Thank you so much, Dana. And thank you to all of our speakers and artists for sharing your wisdom and your talent. And a special thank you to our longtime partners, Humanity United and the Stupski Foundation, for their generous support and collaboration. Listening to the former High Commissioners, I was struck by the ways that, as a group, with each commissioner having served at a different time and handling different conflicts, they were still able to find the common threads connecting the challenges we face today. Think about them for a moment. The global pandemic, which has been made so much worse by racial and economic inequities around the world. Then there is the denial of facts, science, and transparency, causing governments to flounder in containing the pandemic. These are the same factors hampering responses to the climate crisis and the unending disasters taking the greatest toll on the most vulnerable, marginalized populations. And underlying it all, the spread of truth decay, which accelerates disturbing trends of authoritarianism and foments cruelty, exclusion, and even violence against those deemed as other. Connecting these dots is crucial to understanding how we can most effectively take action to stop and reverse these harms. There is also good news in our favor. Even in the midst of so much pain and loss, people everywhere are raising their voices for racial justice and a livable climate. And here in the United States, the citizens have chosen new political leadership over chaos, cruelty, and incompetence. This expression of self-determination in a free and fair election was an unmistakable way of saying we don't want to be a country that walks away from its international human rights obligations, tolerates othering, or cages migrant children. These clear demands for a more just future speak to our theme, that we the people are standing at the precipice. We can resign ourselves to all that's gone wrong and let 2020 go down in history as a year of regression and failure. Or we can build on clear signs of resilience and make the world anew. We must rethink the ways in which the prevailing Western interpretation of human rights is being challenged by a new generation of activists and defenders. There doesn't have to be a choice between civil and political freedoms on the one hand and social and economic rights on the other. Article 3, the inspiration for our work, states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, while Article 1 of the Universal Declaration states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We need to reconcile basic human rights with basic human needs. For people to live in safety and dignity, they must have freedom from discrimination, a government they can trust, as well as a livable climate, a sustainable food supply, access to clean water, and air they can breathe, and an economy that is equitable for all. How we rise to this challenge is the work of the human rights movement today. Each year, the Article 3 Human Rights Global Treasure Award is presented in recognition of extraordinary service to the global human rights movement, encompassing the call of both Article 1 and Article 3. In planning our event, I received an email from the Arch, as he is affectionately known, requesting that young leaders and activists should be featured in his place. With his trademark self-deprecation, the Arch wrote, "You would warm the cockles of this old man's heart if you directed your request to someone a little younger and more dynamic than I, thus contributing to the development of a new cadre of voices for tomorrow." As I read those words, I knew that there could be no more fitting recipient of the Human Rights Global Treasure Award, and certainly none more dynamic or gracious than Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The Arch has risen his entire life to unimaginable challenges and emerged with his huge heart wide open and his laugh heard around the world. To experience the joy of his warmth and compassion, let's have a look at this short film.
This is a moral universe, which means that despite all the evidence that seems to be the contrary, there is no way that evil and injustice and oppression can have the last word.
He was the shield that was a protector. He would be between the gun and the people. As I said, if you wanted to kill us, you have to go through Desmond Tutu first.
I'm certain that assassinating Tutu was discussed at a very high level.
There's something happening here.
Continue in the struggle to make South Africa free.
There's a man with a gun over there.
What was our job? Assassinations, gun running, explosions, murders. It was a terrible frustration that we couldn't neutralize Tutu.
I am not going to let you victimize me and hold me in the position where I have an anger against you, a resentment, and I am looking for the opportunity to pay back. You read about what has taken place, you think you understand, and then you go for yourself. You're sort of devastated by the extent of our inhumanity to one another.
At a time when even Nelson Mandela thought there's no way out of this, the one man that stood true in this whole process was Desmond Tutu.
It's not going to end until someone does something original.
Even if you are a firm believer as he is, it's still a risk to be rejected by a nation in front of everybody.
If you are the chair of a body such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you dare not feel as it were.
You can say that the Truth Commission process took the lead via the victims. But the whites are not interested in this process. They say, I have to share a country with people who cannot even hate properly.
They are simply going to say, oh, he's siding with the victims. Oh, he's not showing even-handedness.
Forgiveness is practical politics.
Africa has a gift to give the world that the world needs desperately.
Ubuntu. To bring that African concept, the spirit of Ubuntu, of how we relate to one another as human beings, and to apply it in very practical terms. To me, that's Tutu's legacy.
If the world wants to survive, we're going to have to recover that we are family.
Dear Arch, you are the embodiment of courage, integrity, standing for the disenfranchised,
speaking truth to power. I am a humble learner from you, and I'm very proud to be amongst your friends. Congratulations for this well-deserved award. We wish you a long life. We wish you all the best. Graça.
It is a great honor to have been asked to speak on behalf of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond today. I am privileged and grateful to have the opportunity. How do we inspire young people today, who are tomorrow's leaders, to take up the cause of human rights? I can think of nothing better than to quote from a speech which Archbishop Desmond gave in Sudan in October 1990. It was 3 months after Brigadier Omar al-Bashir had seized power in a coup. And the Archbishop was asked to give an impromptu address to students at Khartoum University. This, in part, is what he said. If you are a believer, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, whether you are a Hindu or a Buddhist, one of the common factors of these faiths is that no one of them has a low doctrine of human beings. Christianity says human beings are created in the image of God. So does Judaism. Islam says you are the slave of God, whose purpose is to place your will in subjection to the will of Allah. Each of these religions, in their intrinsic nature, compel their adherents to be people who strive for justice, for peace, and for goodness. People of religion have no choice. Where there is injustice and oppression, where people are treated as if they were less than who they are, those created in the image of God, you have no choice but to oppose, and oppose vehemently that injustice and oppression. Can there be a better assertion, any simpler and more powerful to support the statement of Article 1 of the Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights? When in Khartoum, Archbishop Desmond moved from the universal to the particular and condemned human rights abuses that were being perpetrated in South Africa, but which the students immediately recognized as prevailing in Bashir's Sudan, he was cheered to the rafters, just as young people at home cheered him. It was a beautiful demonstration of young people's shared concern for their basic human rights, one that we must nurture across the world today. We thank our Creator for Desmond Tutu's insights, for his life and witness, and thank you for honoring it in this way. I am deeply humbled to acknowledge the award on his behalf.
It is completely impossible to fully describe all of the Archbishop's accomplishments. It's also impossible to catalogue all of his extraordinary attributes. So I'm going to tell you a story. Archbishop Tutu might call it a parable. My name is Paul van Zyl. I served as the Executive Secretary of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And one of my jobs was to question P.W. Botha, South Africa's former Prime Minister, about the crimes that he may have committed before the Truth Commission. The night before, I was preparing diligently in my office and the telephone rang, and it was the Archbishop. And he said, "Paulus, how are you?" I said, "I'm okay, Father. To be honest, I have butterflies in my stomach and I'm a little bit nervous, but I think I'm well prepared and I won't let you down." He said, "I'm certain you won't let me down. That's not the reason I was calling. I was calling to say that if you humiliate the old man tomorrow, I will fire you." I knew better than to argue with the Archbishop, and I paused and swallowed hard and said, "Understood, Father." And then he said, "Good night, good luck, see you tomorrow." And I put down the phone. And I remember thinking to myself, at Nuremberg, the Nazis were prosecuted for their crimes and then hanged. In other transitions, people responsible for gross violations of human rights were sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. In our transition, we were seeking to pursue the truth as robustly as we could, but Archbishop Tutu was at pains to stress that we should do so in a way that didn't humiliate our former oppressors. It turns out that P.W. Botha didn't appear before the Truth Commission. He decided that he was above the truth and he didn't show up. And so we decided to prosecute him, not for the crimes of apartheid, but for failing to abide by a lawfully issued subpoena. So 6 months later, we trooped off to a magistrate's court in the small village, George, in the Eastern Cape, where P.W. Botha lived. And P.W. Botha's lawyers' central defense was that we had no legitimate questions to ask the former Prime Minister, that the Truth Commission was a circus, and that we were intending merely to humiliate him. And so my role in court was to do two things. One was to list all the questions we would have asked P.W. Botha had he arrived. And second was to recount a fateful phone call that occurred the night before, in which the Archbishop called me up, not knowing that A, P.W. Botha would not arrive, and B, not knowing that having not arrived and having failed to abide by a lawfully issued subpoena, his lawyers would argue that all we were intending to do was humiliate the former president. And the Archbishop's words that night was, "If you humiliate the old man, I'll fire you." And that tells you everything you need to know about Archbishop Tutu. Under the dark days of apartheid, he was a truth teller. He galvanized the international community and South Africans to resist the apartheid regime and to persuade the rulers that there was another, more democratic path. And after our transition, he was a truth teller. He spoke out, sometimes at great personal cost, at the excesses or when our new leaders failed to live by the standards we expected of them. But in every instance when he told the truth, he did so in a way that sought to preserve the dignity of the other side, not to demonize people, but actually to create an environment of civility, to create a culture of Ubuntu, and to bring people closer together, not drive them further apart. And it is that kind of leadership that the world desperately needs more than ever before. And it is why it is one of the greatest honors of my life to have known Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
It is clear why the Archbishop is indeed a treasure for the global human rights community, and for those of us who have benefited from his vision for human dignity and freedom. We appreciate the Archbishop's uplifting words as we enter the closing days of a year that has tested us more than any other in living memory. Archbishop Tutu, your life and your life's work, your spirit, your optimism, determination, and humor, even in the darkest moments, inspire us all. You can be confident that today's young activists will walk in your tracks and carry forward your ideals for years to come. You have indeed fulfilled your own wish to give rise to a new cadre of voices for tomorrow. And to the emerging leaders of the human rights movement, we hope that this time together will give each of you a boost of wisdom, strength, and insight as we carry on in the tracks of the elders, meeting the challenges of our time. Thank you for your brave, difficult, and often dangerous work. The world needs you.
I'm Glenn Galich, CEO of the Stepsky Foundation and a board member of Article3.org. As we come to the close of this extraordinary Article3.org Human Rights Day event, let's reflect on what we've been called to do today. We've heard from numerous speakers, admirers of Archbishop Tutu, celebrating his vision and sharing their concerns and hopes for our future as we stand at the precipice. I'd like to raise up a few of the comments they made. Comments that, when taken together, are a clear call to action. We've been called to take the legal and theoretical aspects of the human rights movement from the halls of global institutions to the ground, to support young, rising leaders who come from diverse and resilient communities, who fight through the fatigue of their work every day to achieve a vision for a better future. This call aligns with a global movement focused on recognizing systemic and cultural disparities created by systems designed to repress people based on race and ethnicity. At Article3.org, we seek to create an environment where we can learn from each other. We encourage you to commit to the call to action, and we're eager to learn how you are meeting it through the questions we've asked today. Please share how you will take action in the chat box. We will capture your plans and we'll encourage collaboration. We're so grateful to you for your engagement, your attention, and your activism. We certainly sit at the precipice today, wondering what is next. And together with rising leaders and each other, we can play an important role in determining the future of humanity.
We look forward to welcoming you all in person next December 10th for the International Human Rights Day here at SF Jazz in San Francisco. Until then, we wish you and those you love good health, continued courage, and much success. We hope you'll enjoy this closing performance by the award-winning Vocal Rush from the Oakland School for the Arts.
You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, but you can't find the fighter. But I see it in you, so we're gonna walk it out and move mountains. We're gonna walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the waves, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. Silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise you we'll take the world to its feet and move mountains, take it to its feet and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. rise.